All right, Corey. Well, it's great to get an opportunity to talk NC State football with you for the first time, and maybe no better time to start this type of relationship. Considering I gotta believe, from the outside perspective, this could be the biggest, best year in NC State football that I can remember.
Yeah, it certainly feels like it. Thanks for first of all having me on, Greg. I mean, I agree with you there. I think, I've talked on a few different podcasts and a few different places about this NC State team, and it really seems like leading up to this season, it's the most hype that they've had, especially in the Dave Doran area. Now we see in the rankings being number 13 in both the AP and coaches poll. It's the highest ever ranking for NC State in the preseason coaches poll, which beat out Philip Rivers last year in 2004. And then, in the AP poll, it's tied with the 1975 team. So that's how long you have to go back
Wow.
to see NC State at number 13 in either one of those polls. So, yeah, pretty remarkable, roster that they put together, and also coming off of the year that they had last year. There's a lot of expectations going into this year.
Okay, what would be if NC State had what season? This like record wise, whether it have to be a playoff or finishing in as far as the rankings, where would they have to be for this to be the best season ever?
Well, record-wise, the best record ever was that Philip Rivers, his actual junior year in 2003. They finished 11 wins. So that would be the all-time mark. I think for
Okay,
NC State, it's the hope is to get 10 plus wins. I think for
absolutely.
most NC State fans, they would be very happy with that. You obviously want to be competing for an ACC championship, but this is the last year of divisions. I mean, if NC State wants to be able to get to the ACC championship game, you have to slay Goliath. And while Wake Forest was able to get to the ACC championship game last year, Clemson is still Goliath in the ACC.
Yes.
And picked to win overall number one team in the ACC, and then going into this year, they're looked at as having the best defense. The question mark for Clemson, obviously, being the quarterback position, which is not a question mark at all for NC State. So it's I think expectation wise, it's getting to 10 plus wins. But yeah, obviously trying to get to the ACC championship game, trying to win it, and then seeing where it goes from there. That's what a lot of players and coaches have told us. That's their expectation going into the season. So I don't think you can go wrong with saying that.
And schedule wise, and look, we know Clemson's been able to accomplish it from the ACC, so there's no reason NC State can't accomplish it. But what they're going to have to do is obviously they got to win at Clemson, and you would think, based on the schedule, since Clemson is really still the top dog on the schedule, probably have to run the table in order to make a playoff run. I doubt they'll be able to do it with one loss because they don't say it, but they take history into the equation.
Yeah.
If it's NC State and Notre Dame, they're going to take Notre Dame. That's just the way it is. So NC State can't afford a blemish. But hey, you know what? If you want to play with the big dogs and you think that you've got enough talent to get that accomplished, then go ahead and do it. Set your goals as high as making the playoffs this year.
It would be just perfect for NC State to finish second in the division and not make the ACC championship game, but finish second overall in the ACC in the last year of divisions, and then for the college football playoff to just expand this upcoming summer, and then decide to go to 12 teams next year, and NC State would have been one of the teams in there, right?
Right.
But yeah, I think it is the overall expectation, and yes, you would have to you'd have to win that game down in Death Valley over Clemson and run the table. And I think, non-conference wise, obviously the biggest potential hiccup being the season opener against ECU, or, a home game against Texas Tech, which will be a night game. So those two are going to be tough ones to get. But if they go 4-0, get into Clemson, win that game somehow, I mean, that's the thing. At that point, you are the top dog in the ACC if you're able to
Yes.
do those things. If you go
Yes.
5-0 to start the season, they're the top dog. And I think it's playing with that expectation that going into the season, there's high expectations. But if you go 5-0 in those first 5 games, the expectations are
Oh
astronomically
yeah.
different at that point.
Pressure.
So yeah, and
Yes.
that's something that this staff and this the team itself has never played through. So we'll see what happens once they get to that point. But yeah, I agree with you. I think you have to go 12-0 on the season in order to get to the college football playoff discussion. If that doesn't happen, if you go 11-1 and you somehow win the ACC championship game because one of those wins was against Clemson,
Yeah, then maybe. Yeah,
maybe a chance. And it all depends on how everything else shakes out. So
sure.
we'll see where the chips lay at that point, but or where the chips fall at that point. But yeah, I think the easiest way to do it is to go undefeated, go into the ACC championship game. But again, that's something NC State's never done. So it's a
Nice
much
to talk about it.
higher bar than exactly.
Yeah, because a lot of teams, that's only a dream that you can think about. Hey, not only they have to accomplish that, but do you have the firepower? And that's the reason we're talking about it, because the firepower is there. Starting on offense, and this is football, so you have to have a top quarterback. And as you mentioned, NC State appears to have one. I was looking over my early draft rankings, and if all goes well, Devin Leary could be, if he comes out, could be the fourth quarterback overall as far as my rankings. I think most, maybe could even be top three. That's how good he looked last year as a first year starter.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I think for most people right now, it's Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, and then kind of everybody else. But Devin Leary should be at the very top of that everybody else category, because he was a guy that last year, I think a lot of people kind of put a lot of stock into the 35 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, and it's the first time an ACC player has ever done that. So there should be a lot of stock put into that. But if you watch this guy, if you go back and watch the film review of what he does in the fourth quarter, the way that he steps up, the way that he plays the game late, I think for a lot of the offense last year, they were trying to figure out ways to run the ball, and then kind of falling back on Devin Leary. I don't think it's going to be that way this year, because they know what they have in Devin Leary. The first 2 games last year, he only threw for 3 total touchdowns. 2 touchdowns in the first game, 1 in the second game, and then threw for 4 or more touchdowns in like 7 of the last 10 games. So that's kind of where the bar is for him, is being able to do that on an every single week basis of, throwing for 3 or 4 touchdowns every single week, and being as consistent as he was last year. Is he going to throw more interceptions? Potentially, because they're probably going to throw the ball more. So, but I think when you look at what he's capable of doing, breaking Phillip Rivers' record last year for touchdowns in NC State, most in a single season in NC State history, if he throws for 40 plus this year, he has a chance of knocking down the career record for Phillip Rivers, which was set over the course of 4 years for a guy like Devin Leary, who has really only started a full 2 years. That would be a remarkable feat.
And you'd have to put him up there if you're looking for like some sleeper Heisman candidates. He definitely has to fit the bill. That's what you're looking for. You're always trying to see, okay, does he have a good enough team? Are they playing good enough opponents? Does he have that game that if he really looks good? So, not saying he's going to win it, but he's got that sleeper category in him that all signs are pointing towards that possibly being the case if they have a magical season.
I was going to say very Kenny Pickett vibes from last year, right? Because Kenny Pickett went into the year, the most touchdowns he had ever thrown in a season, I believe, was less than 20. And he throws for 40 plus last year. I think he threw for 50 plus last year. And not to say that Devin Leary is going to be Kenny Pickett, but that's the kind of season you have to have if you want to be a quarterback in the ACC, if you want to be a player in the ACC that's in the Heisman conversation. Now, Pickett didn't end up winning it. I'm not saying Devin Leary is going to win it, but you have to be the best player on the best team in your conference in order to be in that discussion. And I think he has a chance to do that this year.
And what you can't do is do what Pitt did last year, and that's lose games you shouldn't lose. And that's going to be, like you said, if NC State were to magically win those first 5 games, including Clemson, well, what happens after that? Do you drop a game you shouldn't drop? Because that's what happens, really, when you take a look at a lot of these other ACC contenders. Clemson's been the only program in the last 6, 7, 8 years that has been able to run the table and blow out everybody and not have that. Sure, once every couple of years they'll have that game, but that's it. No other program in the ACC has been able to accomplish that, and we'll see if NC State. Hopefully, as a Pac fan, you hope they're in that position most of all. Let's talk about the running back spot, because as you said, they're probably going to throw the ball more this year, and I'm assuming that's because Bam Knight and Ricky Person are gone. By the way, as a Jet fan, I'm pretty happy to see what Bam Knight's already doing. He had a really good first preseason game, and probably make the team with his special teams ability as well. But yeah, that's a lot of production to lose both Person and Bam Knight. So who's going to take over? Apparently, they don't have anybody yet.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it right now, Jordan Houston is kind of the top guy
Okay.
that has really kind of put himself at the top of the depth chart. From talking to coaches, from talking to Dave Doran after practices and things like that, and then talking to people within the program as well. The discussion has been that Jordan Houston has set himself apart. Demi Sumo Karngbe is the other guy that's really in this mix. He's a redshirt freshman that came from New Jersey. His nickname was Slimy Shark coming out of high school, and the reason
Okay.
why, he's just an elusive back. He's a guy that was also an all-purpose back. So you've got Jordan Houston, who was top 5 all-purpose back in his class. Again, all-purpose backs are completely different categories, so there's not a ton of them, but he's the guy that has catching potential out of the backfield. And then you've also got, as I said, Demi Sumo Karngbe, that's going to be a receiving option out of the backfield. And then Michael Allen is kind of that third guy in the mix. Him and Delbert Mims, those are completely different backs because for a guy like Michael Allen, he's much more of like a Nyheim Hines type of guy, where he's going to be a guy that they can flex out to the wide receiver position, but also play running back. He did that at Greenville Rose as a 4-star running back last year. Played more wide receiver coming off an injury last year at the beginning of the season than they did running back. So he's a guy that has that option. And then Delbert Mims is kind of your traditional goal line, maybe touchdown vulture kind of guy. If you want to talk about fantasy football for
Okay.
NC State. I don't know how much he's going to get in that mix, but he's a guy that we talked about for a couple of years. His training regimen back in 2020, when everybody else was kind of off doing their own thing, he was in the NC State parking lot pulling trucks. So
Oh,
he's that big of a dude that has a
okay.
chance to be a big back. But yeah, I mean, if you're putting stock in anybody right now, I would obviously say Jordan Houston at the top, guy that did start some games back in 2019, was productive, and then Demi Sumo being probably the number 2 back in the rotation.
All right, and look, it's college football, so you never know where these guys come from, and that's why I'm also going to ask you a little bit later on to name some potential breakout players, players that maybe the national fan base hasn't ever heard of yet, and that's what's great about college football. All right, tight end. So Dylan Parham, starter's gone. So who takes over?
Yeah, I think they're going to go to more of a pass happy offense with
Oh,
the H back position too. 2 guys that stepped up last year. Chris Tootle caught 4 touchdowns last year. Kind of broke out at the beginning of the year. Previously a wide receiver, moved to that tight end position, and then another guy that I'm going to talk about later when you want to talk about breakout guys, Trent Penix, moved to the H back role last year, caught 3 touchdowns. We'll talk a little bit more about his final 5 games later in the podcast, but he's a guy that to me has a chance, has breakout potential. We compared his position to a guy like Jalen Samuels a few years ago. I'm not
okay.
saying he is Jalen Samuels in this offense or he's going to be, but that is the position that they have him playing. So he's an H back. He's a guy that can be a move tight end. They've also got 2 guys in the Seabro twins that came from Georgia that have a chance to potentially be more of those blocking tight ends. And then a guy like Cam Walker, who came in he's a mountain guy from the mountains of North Carolina, came in as a walk-on and has a chance to, has really built up his body to be a blocking tight end too.
All right. Now let's talk about that wide receiver spot. And Mezzi's gone. That's a big loss because he was there like practically forever. And so now it's what, Thayer Thomas and Devin Carter. That's like the 1-2 punch for most of Devin Leary's passes this season.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see where they end up putting Thayer Thomas because we've heard that he's been moved around at the position. He's been moved. He's played a tight or a slot position for them for several years and has been moved around a little bit from outside receiver to that slot position.
Okay.
I think he's going to slide into the slot still, but obviously Devin Carter being the big play guy down the field, big physical receiver taking over that Emeka Emezi position from last year. And if Thayer Thomas is on the field as a slot position guy, I think you see guys like Anthony Smith, who was a kind of a home run hitter for them last year, former track star. The big thing he's got to work on is the hands and being able to run more reliable routes. But I think as he's progressed this offseason and seen the role that he could potentially have, we've heard a lot about his potential. And then if you got a guy in the slot, if a guy like Thayer Thomas slides out to the outside position, in the slot position, you've got 2 guys in Julian Gray and Porter Rooks, Porter Rooks being the number 4 receiver for the team last year in receiving yards. He's a former 4-star guy. Julian Gray's a former 4-star guy. And then one guy that I don't want to leave out in this too, Daryl Jones, that can slide to either one of the outside positions. He comes over from Maryland. Didn't have a ton of production at Maryland, but in his last game had a breakout game at the bowl against Virginia Tech, and he has a chance to really work his way into the system. He's somebody that they really needed in this system where they didn't have a ton of speed. He's a big speed receiver, so if they can add him and find ways to utilize him, I think he could be another big name in this receiving corps too.
Speaking of transfers, and we can start offensively. Not that I see a whole lot defensively either, but we're not talking defense just yet. I don't notice a whole lot of transfers that are going to be really making an impact this season.
Yeah, and that's been a little bit of a change from the past because obviously in the last couple of years they've taken a ton of transfers and defensively most of all Cory Durden and obviously Cyrus Fagan planning on playing a big role, but yeah, the one guy that you can really talk about that is a transfer along this offense, we talked about Daryl Jones, but, on the offensive line, one big reason why I think a lot of people expect for this, this running back position to have a little more success this year is because of a guy like Chandler Zavala, who was a guy that came in last year in the offseason. So he got a chance to play the first 5 games for NC State last year, but he comes in this year fully healthy, suffered a seasoning injury last year, fought against the NCAA, and ended up getting an extra year.
Good.
So that's the expectation for him to come into this year at that left guard position to play a big role. And another one is Anthony Belton, too, a JUCO transfer that came in. He has a chance to take over Ike Ekwonu's position at the left tackle spot. He came over 2 years ago, got a chance to learn under Ike Ekwonu, and everything that we've heard so far, got at 6'6", 330 pounds, and is probably going to be starting at that left tackle position if all goes well throughout the rest of fall camp for him.
4 starters are back overall, so and I know it's hard to replace an Icky, but who would you say is the most talented?
The most talented, I think, going into this year, probably Chandler Zavala. If we're talking about pure talent, potential NFL talent in the future, he's a guy that plays that left guard position really well. Grant Gibson is the most experienced guy to me coming into this year. Preseason All-ACC pick. I think he has a chance to win that award, but he does play the center position, so it's not usually a highly coveted in the NFL position. So I think he has a chance to really kind of set himself apart this year.
Okay.
Had a few pre-snap penalties last year that he was upset with, but I think he has a chance to be really good. And then Dylan McMahon at the right guard position is somebody that was put on Bruce Feldman's Freaks list before the season this year, was on the Freaks list last year, on the Freaks list again this year, and everything that we've heard, he's developed even more this offseason into a guy that has a good chance to really solidify that right guard position and help get the running game going on both sides this year.
And now, while there are some questions on offense, and we talked about some of the players that need to be replaced, at least Devin Leary is still there, and that's important. But defensively, that's not the case. This side of the ball, this is why I think NC State fans are probably real excited, because not only do you have yourself a potential star quarterback, but you have one of the best defenses that this program's had in a while. With 10 starters coming back, you're always loaded up front. I mean, Doran just does a great job recruiting, and then transfer, like you mentioned, from Florida State comes over to help. But then that linebacking core is amazing. We'll talk about that in a little bit in the secondary as well. But let's start up front, and we could start with Durden. So Durden comes over from FSU and does a really good job. So he's really, though, the main guy back. Who else? Besides Durden, you could obviously talk a little bit about Durden and what kind of upside he has at the next level. But who else should we be keeping an eye on up front?
Yeah, Durden being a guy that was all ACC last year. I think a lot of people kind of said, "Hey, maybe it was because of injuries," but the way that he played last season was a really, really big thing for NC State. That's a big position that they have to in the 3-3-5 system. As we saw with Lee McNeil a few years ago, that's the reason why that 2020 defense was so good. Cory Durden being so productive last year at that position. He's got 2 guys behind him that are trying to knock on the door to push him. That's why we've heard so much about Durden potentially playing the defensive end spot as well as playing the defensive tackle spot that's coming up here, because you have C.J. Clark, who actually was the starter going into last year, over Durden once the season started. He suffered an injury right before the Clemson game, was out the rest of the season. That was where Durden had his breakout game. So C.J. Clark is another one. Joshua Harris, another former four-star guy. Those two came into the class together. Joshua Harris has cut 40 pounds from his frame. Was playing around 360 to 370 a few years ago, is now around 315 to 320. So he's a guy that has a chance to really break out this upcoming season, and that's just at the nose tackle position. On the outside, Savion Jackson takes over Bradley Chubb's former number and was formerly worn by Mario Williams, so they clearly have high expectations for him. He was injured for the last 3 or 4 games last year. I can't really remember, but he has breakout potential. And then along the other side, a guy like Davin Vann. They lose Daniel Joseph, who goes to the Bills. He's really the only significant loss that this defense truly had, in terms of starters coming into this year. And a guy like Davin Vann, former wrestler, guy that has really added a ton to his frame and become a much more elusive defensive end for this team. I think he has a chance to break out this year. He's probably the guy, if you're looking for the highest sack total, I think it could end up being Davin Vann, even though he's somebody that not a lot of people know about. And then backing him up too, there's so many other guys that are up and down this rotation. And then another guy that I wanted to point out too, Travali Price, that we've heard so much about. Just a big defensive end, 6'4", brings a ton of speed over to this team too. So he didn't get a chance to play a lot last year as a true freshman. As a redshirt freshman coming into this year, I think he has breakout potential too.
Would you agree then, or is there another spot I'm completely missing, that Doran's best position as far as his recruiting history has been up front on the defensive line?
Yeah, it's typically been on the defensive line, and the biggest reason why is because he's successfully had a lot of guys that he's recruited go to the NFL. I mean, you think about that 2017 defensive line; all 4 of them ended up going to the NFL. All 4 of them are still in the NFL. Obviously, Bradley Chubb, we want to see him be fully healthy for a season and be on a good team. Like, he finally gets a good team coming into this year, so we'll see what he's truly his true potential. And then several guys like Justin Jones, Aleem McNeil. You think of the I'm blinking here, B.J. Hill, Contavious Street, all those guys still in the NFL. Those are the types of guys he's produced, and a ton of those guys came from in-state too. So that's why they're having in-state success at the defensive line as well.
Wow, let's talk about this linebacker unit. Could be, if healthy, one of, if not the best in all of the country. And we have to start with Peyton Wilson. I mean, this poor kid. The injuries are amazing, but his aggressive nature definitely has a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
You just root for a guy like that because he's so talented when he's on the field, and he's a big difference maker. And you talk about trying to put together a magical season. Not sure you can do that without him. Not saying it can't be a good season and all that, but if you want to really, set yourself high, you need guys like Peyton Wilson healthy.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I mean, Peyton is a guy that, going into last year was, looked at as a potential, preseason all ACC defensive player of the year. They don't have a preseason defensive player of the year, but a lot of people were kind of talking about it like, hey, this is the guy. Like this, if you're looking for somebody, it's him, Brian Brzee from Clemson, and maybe a couple other guys that were looked at as potential preseason all ACC defensive player of the year. He gets injured in the second week of the season. He's lost for the entire rest of the season. But you look back at the potential that he has, over 100 tackles during the 2020 season, and then in 2019, as a reserve, led the team in tackles. He wasn't even the starter in 2019, and he led the team in tackles. So he's a guy that just is all over the ball all the time. And I think the big thing for NC State that helps him and helps the starting linebacker core is they feel really, really good about the depth behind every single one of them going to this year. Okay. But yeah, I mean, they feel really good about the top 3. Obviously, Drake Thomas,
yeah,
Drake Thomas, I haven't even mentioned. Yeah, and he has potential to be all ACC again this year. Was first team last year, finished with 99 tackles, and he was somebody that in the preseason, so many people told us behind the scenes, like, he's been the best defensive player. And we didn't really believe it because you had Peyton Wilson on the team. You had Isaiah Moore on the team. You had Tanner Ingle on the team that we'll talk about in a second, I'm sure. But he was the guy that everybody was talking about. Like, he's going to be ridiculously good this year. And he was special. I mean, even after they lost all these guys, not only did he step up as a player overall, but as a leader too, and taking over that middle linebacker position and leading guys that hadn't really had a ton of snaps. And he was that guy this past year. So I think you're going to see a little bit more of a rotation, which is what you want to see from a team that could potentially win the ACC this year. That's where this really helps the defense, is having those rotations, having a bunch of guys that don't have to take 60 to 70 snaps every single week to start the season.
All right, now the secondary, and you look at this, all 4 players back, very experienced, and you touched up on Tanner Ingle, who is the leader of the secondary. So how good is Ingle? What kind of a ceiling does he have?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that, when he first came to NC State, we heard so much about what he was doing in the preseason, and we didn't know what his potential was. He actually started at the nickel position because it was a need at the time, and then he's now moved to safety. And look, that 2020 season, it was not his best. I mean, he'll tell you that he was ejected from 3 different games from targeting. He was also a little bit injury prone in 2020, but last season he put it all together. He played. He said he played with his head more than his heart, which I think helps a lot. And in talking to him, he's excited for this season because he knows the potential for him. He's an undersized safety, probably not going to be getting a ton of looks at the NFL level.
Okay.
But he's a guy that has the potential. One guy that I think will get a ton of looks at the NFL level, though, if he stays healthy this full season, is Tyler Baker-Williams. You mentioned all 4 starters back. He's that nickel guy. Right. That 5th cornerback that they have rotating, covering the slot guys, covering the linebacker. I mean, covering the tight ends, and everything that we hear from from NC State about where he's kind of led to the season. There's a reason why both him and Devin Leary wear the number 13. You've got one that's kind of the leader, obviously on the offensive side of the ball, and one that's that leader in the secondary. And Tyler Baker-Williams, while he's not a guy that's going to hype himself up or be talked about a ton, he just goes out there and does his work. And then Shaheem Battle is another guy that I think has NFL potential, that played extremely well last year. Didn't have a ton of stats, didn't come away with a ton of interceptions, stuff like that. But if you go back and watch the film, he was a lockdown corner last year in a lot of big games that NC State really needed him, and in some big situations late in games. I think that shines a little more this season. People know a little bit more about him. And then Tariq Pitts, opposite of him, guy that came over originally from West Virginia, played in Tony Gibson's system, went to Marshall, and then now at NC State. He played really well, brought some aggression last year to this defense. And then at that second safety position, Tanner Ingle holds down one. That second one is between 3 guys right now. Right now it's obviously Devin Boykin stepped up last year a lot. Cyrus Fagan was a guy that that at the beginning of the year was looked at as a starter, and he went down with injury in that second game too. A lot of people kind of forget about that. They remember Peyton Wilson, but not Cyrus Fagan. And then the third guy in that rotation being Jakeem Harris, who has been a starter in the past. So they feel really good about that safety position, and then we'll see where exactly those guys slot in and who goes to free, who goes to strong safety this upcoming year.
Would you say Battle is the one that has the most pro potential?
I think so, and mostly because of the frame that he has. He has more of the the intangibles that you want to see and the measurables too. So I think at the next level, he has a chance to be a guy that could be a shutdown corner at the NFL level. He came over to NC State, from inside of the state of North Carolina, from the the 252 that a lot of people know in North Carolina, and then like I said, Tyler Baker-Williams would be probably the guy there. In terms of the secondary, I think those two have the most pro potential. Okay. Peyton Wilson has a great season. Isaiah Moore has a great season. Those 2 guys, measurables and just the wit and the style that they play with. I think any of those linebackers could go to the NFL too.
All right, and then we close out with special teams, which was a pretty important part of the team last year. One of the better seasons. Place kicker Christopher Dunn's been there forever, even though he seemed to struggle statistically last year. But he's the all-time leading scorer, and he hasn't missed an extra point yet?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Going into the season, he's another one that knows, hey, I've got to step up, especially when it comes to the field goal unit. He missed more than he wanted to last season, and I think that was a frustration for him. Obviously missed some big ones in that Clemson game that I think a lot of people remember. So he comes into the season with really high expectations for himself personally. I think a lot of people, around NC State are just kind of going, we're going to see this. We're going to see the Christopher Dunn of old. And that was, his freshman season. He broke the NC State record. And then, his second season at NC State played really well as well. So I think they want to see him kind of come back to, where he was in the first couple seasons and not feel the pressure that he had last year. I think there was a lot of pressure put on him, himself internally. But, when you look at the rest of the unit, you lose a guy like Trenton Gill, who's now with the Bears, was actually drafted by the Bears.
Yep.
And has broke out so far, had a really good, fall camp for them. And going into the season, probably the starter there. They get a guy in Shane McDonough that's come over from Towson, was their all-time leading in terms of punt yardage, average punt yardage. Comes over from Towson, a guy that was, named to all-conference 2 years in a row as a punter. So he has a chance to be, a big part of the special teams as well. And then, there's so many guys that are still back. Thayer Thomas being at the punt return position. Okay. The big question mark being, who's going to take over that kickoff return position? Because obviously, as you mentioned, Zonovan Knight's now with your Jets. So he's not going to be, returning kicks for NC State anymore. Had multiple touchdowns last year as a kick returner. Everything that we've heard so far is it's still kind of by committee at this point. But I mentioned Julian Gray earlier. I wouldn't be surprised to see him be a guy there. Anthony Smith potentially. Both those guys, former track stars. Ran the 100 meter several times at, I believe, like around 10.6, 10.7. So those are two guys that have really high potential at that spot. And I wouldn't be surprised to see guys like Tanner Ingle potentially go back there as well. He's done that in the past in kickoff return. So we'll see exactly where all those guys land coming into the season.
And so now it's time to, and you've already mentioned some of them, maybe all of them, but let's go over your top breakthrough players for the upcoming season.
Yeah, if I had to go offensively, I think biggest breakthrough potential, in terms of guys that we don't know, in terms of guys that we're not talking about. I mean, I keep mentioning Julian Gray. I think he has potential all the way around. But the guy I'm going to go with is Demi Sumo. Demi Sumo Karngbe is what he's going by now, added to the last name there. We didn't see that coming until the offseason. But yeah, he's a guy that has really good potential. We heard about him a ton last offseason about what he could potentially do. And they were kind of saying, look, if it wasn't for these two guys that we have ahead of them, he would be a guy that would be on the field and finding time in this offense. He has great potential, not only as a running back, but also as kind of a scat back type of guy. And I think that's going to be really, really big in this system where we talk so much about, Devin Leary being the main focal point of this offense. He can't just throw over the top all the time. He's got to have his check down guys too. Thayer Thomas is going to be one of those, but I think Demi Sumo Karngbe has a chance to be one of those as well.
All right, so he would be your top guy on offense?
Yes, and then on the defensive side of the ball, man, it's really tough because, again, like you said, 10 of 11 guys that are back.
Yeah.
If I had to pick one guy that I think has that breakout potential, I would say Devin Boykin, in the defensive backfield. I mentioned him earlier, but if I'm going of one guy that I had to pick for this, I'd say Davin Vann. I mean, he's the guy. He has a chance to be a starter this year. He's been the starter step in for Daniel Joseph, and he's going to be a guy that they're going to rush the passer a little bit more with him too. They'll, I think obviously with Savion Jackson coming back, he has a chance to be a little bit more of a pass rusher. But this is a guy that, not only can he stop the run, but he's somebody that, can set the edge for you, but also can be able to, to really get into the backfield. And I think he has a chance to get after the quarterback a lot this year. So if you're looking for a guy that has, all the chance to, be able to be a statistical leader for this team, I think Davin Vann, even though he's coming into, I believe it's his redshirt freshman year, I forget with all the 2020 stuff that happened. So he's a guy that has a chance to be really productive this year and be, breakout potential for the next few years.
And you mentioned, was it Trip Henix?
Yes.
So why did you mention him? What was it that you wanted to talk about him about?
Yeah, I mean, I said Demi Sumo because it was a guy that not a lot of people probably will know about or do know about at this point. But yeah, Trent Penix is a guy that, yeah, you're right. I should have said Trent Penix.
That's okay.
But looking back at last year, the reason why I wanted to point that out, the last 5 games last year, 11 receptions for him, 203 yards, 3
Wow.
touchdowns. If he's able to kind of, flex that out into an entire season, it was almost like they discovered him, with 5 games left in the season. Like, hey, he has a chance to be, have breakout potential. And if his blocking improves a little bit more this year, we could see him on the field even more than we did last year. But I think if he's able to kind of add to those numbers, maybe double his touchdown total from last year, and be a guy that catches for over 500 yards and is a tone setter on the outside when it comes to the running game, I think he has a chance to be a really big breakout player for this team as well.
So his actual, does he have like a position?
Yeah, so he's the one that I was describing earlier that has a chance to be kind of the Jalen Samuels type of Swiss Army knife in this offense. He started as a running back at NC State. I don't think he's going to get many carries for this offense, but he could be a guy that you could see flexing around, kind of in that jet sweep type of formation as well. But I think he's a guy that across the middle of the field, they really need to open up the middle of the field. He's a guy that has a chance to do that. Has been clocked in the past with 4.4 speed, so even though he's a big body tight end, he's got very real speed too.
All right. And by the way, I see MJ Morris. Was he the top recruit for the team this past year overall?
It kind of depends on what you're looking at in terms of whether it was the offense or defense. I think he was honestly. I mean, when you look at the overall kind of feel of the team, he was the top guy. He was a guy that was a 4-star, slipped a little bit because he had an injury during his junior year. Everything that we've heard so far is that he's kind of put himself in a good place going into next year for the quarterback battle. But he'll have to compete with Ben Finley. He'll also have to compete with, this year alone, they have a guy in Jack Chambers that came over just to simply be the backup for this team in case of something, kind of like that pull in case of emergency type of guy. If Devin Leary goes down, Jack Chambers was the starter for the last 4 years for Charleston Southern. He comes into this year as a guy that, if they need him, he's there. But everything we've heard so far, MJ Morris has played really well in the offseason. But competing with Ben Finley, and then Lex Thomas will come in next year. And I wouldn't be surprised if they could take a transfer quarterback too next year because of how good this defense could still be next year and how many offensive pieces they could have come back next year too.
Leary, how many more eligibility years does he have left?
This is technically his redshirt junior season.
Oh, so he has another year.
He does have another year, but obviously, with all the NFL talk, if things pan out well for him, and for NC State as a whole, he'll probably be a guy that leaves after this year and moves on. So they're really looking at that that backup quarterback position battle a lot right now.
Cory, tell us a little bit about Pack Pride at 247 Sports. So this is the destination for NC State sports coverage, isn't it?
Yeah, we definitely feel that way. I mean, Pack Pride has, kind of built its name over the years. We actually had the largest subscriber base we've ever had for Pack Pride as a whole. We've got a guy, Michael Clark, who, the ins and outs of recruiting and, always has scoop from camp and things like that. We cover basketball, we cover football, we cover everything. So, yeah, we look, I'm not going to say, hey, we're definitely, there, but I think we feel that way. We have a lot of people. Oh yeah. We have a lot of people that Look, I'm not a cocky person, so I don't want to say like, oh yeah, we're definitely better than all of them. But
sure.
I mean, we definitely feel that way. We definitely feel like we have the most scoop. If you're looking for a place to go and get every single bit of information that you could possibly get, go to Pack Pride, check it out, become a subscriber. $1 for the first month. We always have deals running, 30% off for a full year if you want to check it out. So make sure to check that out over at Pack Pride. You can follow us at Pack Pride on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and then we're also on TikTok now, which I don't know.
Whatever, yeah.
We're on
if
there,
it works,
so,
you're on there. Yeah, take advantage. Okay, yeah. I mean, because as a fan, you have to find one place that you could really trust, and I think the dollar amount is definitely good enough that if you're a diehard fan, especially multiple sports, you're a diehard fan, then you want to stay up to date with what's going on, especially the recruiting part, because that's the part that's very hard, especially for the like the top columnists at the newspapers. I mean, they don't have time for the stuff.
Yeah, and I
They
was
get
gonna
the
say,
information from you guys.
yeah, if you want to, I mean, if you want to follow NC State football recruiting, basketball recruiting, everything along those lines, I mean, we're the best place for that because the 24/7 network is the largest when it comes to recruiting right now. It's also we have connections in every single different area. So while I think a lot of people are kind of looking for recruiting about just one specific school, the great thing about it is you subscribe to Pack Pride, you also get access to see everything else along the 24/7 Sports Network.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, I mean that's all you can ask for, right?
Yeah. And look, anybody that really cares about recruiting, that really knows that 247 is really the one you should think of more than anyone else because of how they incorporate all of the rankings, and it makes it much easier to just well, you got 50 services out there saying these 3-star, 4-star, 5-star, whatever, but 247 does it the best. It's the only one I use.
Yeah, and we're gonna give you the honest take as well.
uh Podcast, you guys doing anything? You do anything weekly, or you got your own podcast?
Yes, we do a podcast weekly. You can find that, I believe, if you look on Spotify, if you look anywhere, it's called just the Pack Pride Podcast. Made it simple so people can find it. But yeah, that's our podcast. We're actually do positional breakdowns. So if you want to hear, a 30-minute podcast on every single position in depth, we do that. Preseason, I'm actually about to start shooting a podcast here in a couple minutes after we finish this one, looking at the safeties and looking at special teams. So it's nice to get a refresher again, talking to you about that. And then we also have a weekly podcast every single week too that we shoot on Mondays on location at Amedio's here in Raleigh. Do it with my guy James Curl, and we put that out every Tuesday morning too. So make sure you check that out
Emilio's,
too.
did you say?
Amedio's.
Was that a
Yes.
restaurant?
Yes, it is. It's an Italian restaurant, actually.
Restaurant.
Yes, it was founded by a former NC State football player. Just recently passed away, unfortunately. But man, the place there, if you're looking for, like a history lesson on NC State, Amedio's is where you go. It's got like their own personal Hall of Fame everywhere. Every single booth is named after a historic player or
cool.
Coach. And then they've got an entire room in the back. One side is football, one side is basketball, looking at, one side is kind of the Jimmy V room, and then the other side is has the football field where Chuck Amato used to do all of his weekly shows there too. And that's actually where we shoot now as well. So
yeah, you got to now Dave Doran's got to get that football side.
Oh yeah,
Jimmy V has basically taken over everything NC State, but you need somebody to compete with Jimmy V on the football side. Hopefully Dave Doran's that guy.
Yeah, and you're starting to see that Dave Doran personality too. Like, we didn't talk about that, but I mean, Dave Doran, those lean years, he was kind of, a little bit apprehensive towards the media, but
stressful,
man,
too, probably.
Yeah, oh yeah, exactly. And you're starting to see it now kind of come out like, hey man, he's not only confident, but I mean, he's growing the full-on beard. He's kind of becoming himself now, and I think that's, from a confidence standpoint of the team, you're seeing it from the coaching staff as well.
All right. Do you think he's a lifer?
I think so.
Yeah, he's that type of guy. He's a college coach.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think one of the things about him, too, is he loves the area. His kids all went to Cardinal Gibbons, which is right across the street from NC State's campus. So, he's kind of become, a staple of NC State. He's entering his 10th year, which, if you know anything about college football, like, that's not normal. So I think if he has the season that they expect this year, there will be some talk in the offseason about, where if he could potentially go somewhere. So I'm not going to say, he's a lifer at NC State, but, I think for NC State, they gave him a big bonus this past offseason.
Okay.
Gave him, a new contract for over $5 million a year. So there's definitely the expectation that they should be able to, keep him for additional years even after this year too.
Well, I also think what's so successful about it and what's so hard about college football when you're changing landscapes is he's been so dialed into the community, like you said. He knows it so well that if you were to leave and go somewhere, it can't be far. And then if he's not far, well, why would he leave NC State? So that's the trick.
Yeah, exactly. And he's a guy from the from the north. He obviously coached at Northern Illinois for several years, and then was also previously a coach at Kansas. Actually, I say that he's from the Midwest, but he's coached several teams up in the northern part of the country, and coached obviously now in the ACC for the last 10 years. So he's been in a lot of different places and coached in a lot of different places. But yeah, I mean, this feels like home for him now. And talking to him, he's built not only a legacy at NC State already, but also built a culture that I think is going to be really, really hard to build in other places at NC State. He has things like 2 weeks ago they had a thing called the Victory Day, which is where they have a lot of people come in. It's children with Down syndrome that come
Okay.
into to the facility, and you see the culture there. You see the culture with the players, and it's just there's a real buy-in, and it's going to be hard to really build that anywhere else.
Yeah, it's like he's built himself a family, and it's hard
Exactly.
to leave your family. So, but let's first things first. Let's have that magical season, and then we'll go from there. I look forward to talking to you during the season. Not sure when, but we'll pick a spot or two, and we definitely hope it's because NC State's having a really good one. So, Cory, I appreciate you taking your time out to talk to us, and we look forward to talking to you again during the season.
Yes, sir. Thanks again, Greg. Have a good one, man.
You got it.